Before we get to the show, I got a little anecdote, I guess. I'm a 90s kid, and this video is the culmination of me watching Bill Nye, Mythbusters, Steve Irwin. That stuff really spoke to me, and I was like, wow, this is stuff I could do as a career, but there were no archaeologists doing that. And I went to graduate school to do that. And at graduate school, I had to write a master's thesis. And a master's thesis is essentially just a body of work that proves you can do research. And mine was on stone tools. It took me a very long time to write this. You guys know I struggle with procrastination and attention. I'm open about my issues. I have ADHD. It's really hard for me to get stuff done. If you struggle with that as well, you're not alone. I'm the kind of guy who does everything the night before. It's just the only way it works for me. It's the only way it's worked my whole life. And I finally was like, I have to get this video on YouTube because I got to start making money. And I did it. So I put it all together. And before we start the show, I just want you guys to know this is what made me an archaeologist, this thesis and this project. And I really hope you enjoy it. So let's start the show. In prehistoric North America, there's a gradual trend showing a decrease in projectile point size over time. Starting in the Paleolithic, or the Mesolithic as we want to say in North America, which we would just call the Paleoindian period, the points are very big. The stone tool industry that they used was just big. Clovis points, Folsom points, Hell Gap points, Western stemmed points, all very big. Then they slowly get smaller into the early Archaic, Middle Archaic, Late Archaic, Woodland, Mississippian, and then in the late prehistoric, about 1,000 years ago, which would be right around the medieval warm period, the points get very small, almost to the size of what we would know as arrowheads. The question is, why? Obviously, maybe the bow and arrow was invented then, but the bow and arrow is pretty old. The Atlatls older, so I don't know. How do we know the difference? How do we... What are you doing? What's the reason for this decrease in size? Was the bow just miraculously made that day and it just changed? Or what happened? And how do we differentiate between these point sizes? To do this, I had to use some science. In the modern day, all that remains of these arrows or atlatl darts is the stone tips, the stone points at the end. The wood, the fletching on the end, the sinew, and the pitch that is used to socket the point into the wood is gone. It's organic, it rots away, it's lost to time. So all we have are the points. Without a time machine, we can't tell what they were attached to. We can take a guess. If it's a big point, it's probably attached to something long. If it was a small point, it's probably attached to something short. But do we know that for sure? Without finding it attached to it? Several studies have come out trying to, attempt to figure this out. The foremost of those studies was done by David Hurst Thomas. He collected a bunch of data in the Museum of Natural History of a bunch of points that were attached to arrow shafts and a bunch of points that were attached to dart shafts. And he mathematically calculated them based on projectile point length, width, thickness, neck width, and weight. Then he took that information and did a discriminant function analysis and could determine the points with 86% accuracy. If you want to know what that means, imagine you have a graph, you have your y-axis and your x-axis, right? And then he plots all those points. The arrowheads will end up on the top part, the atlatl darts will end up on the bottom part because they're heavier. And then you plug in whatever calculations you have for a point you find in the field, and wherever that falls on this calculation into that cluster or that cluster is what you're going to look at. And he determined that with 86% accuracy. It's pretty neat. But that is based on the collection that was at the Museum of Natural History, and I believe some others that he did. That's a small sample of an entire continent of projectile points. Many other studies have sought to determine this as well, doing similar things, and that is Schott, Corliss, Patterson, Evans, and Hildebrandt and King. One of the cool things about my master's thesis was the background research was just straight up describing what an atlatl was. So I got to do tons of in-depth research, researching atlatls, the history of them, and the bow and arrow as well, and writing about that, which was objectively dope. And not subjectively, it was awesome.
From the makers of the stone sling, the javelin, and thrown feces comes the atlatl. The atlatl is a lever device that allows the human to store more potential kinetic energy in their arm and use this to hit their targets with greater power and velocity than the human arm can ever do alone. It's also simple to use. Simply grip the handle at the proximal end and insert the dart in the back. When you're ready to throw, put it up to your ear and then launch that bad boy to the broadside of a mammoth. Warning, this device may cause agriculture, interpersonal violence, and the extinction of Echabon.
The atlatl, if you didn't notice between the, because of the consonants that are jumbled together in the name, it's a Nahuatl word. In Nahuatl, the actual way to pronounce it is Nahuatl, and it's a Aztec, Mexica word. So you're saying Atlatl. It's a Aztec spear thrower. Side note, the Mexico is named after the Mexica. The Mexica is what the Aztecs called themselves. And aside of the aside, I had a history teacher in high school who said, was talking about the Olmecs, and he said, that's what Mexico was named after, Old Mexico. And I essentially shit my pants, because that is false. But the reason we use that word, Atlatl, is because the Spaniards, when they got to Mexico, were, in the line of fire of atlatls, and you're gonna know what it's called when you learn what they are. The Aztecs favored atlatls as a weapon of warfare, as did the Maya. It long since fell out of use in most of the continent after it got replaced by the bow and arrow, but the Mexicans, the Maya and the Aztecs had a very strong warrior culture, and I would have favored to use that as a weapon too if I had the choice between bow and arrow and atlatl. But the irony of this is the atlatl was used all around the world for millennia. And in ancient Spain, they probably had a word for it. But it long since fell out of use because it was replaced by the bow and arrow and then later firearms, which were brought to Mexico then. And so a Stone Age weapon and a Steel Age weapon, or Gunpowder Age weapon we could say, were pitted against each other. And I believe in some instances the atlatl darts could pierce Spaniard armor. I don't remember if that's true or not, there's a history thing on it.
Yes! Right in the eye!
Okay, now I know. Anyway, that's why we call it that. The oldest evidence for an atlatl that we know of is 17,500 years before the present, 17,500 BP. That's the Upper Paleolithic of Europe. We know it was definitely in use by 12,500 because you see widespread use of them and they're found all over. But I think they're a lot older than that, and let me get to why.
We have a bit older evidence archaeologically for atlatls going back into the Pleistocene. The oldest atlatl ever excavated has been radiocarbon dated to 17,500 years, and that was found in France. However, we have some circumstantial evidence for atlatl use in other parts of the world, particularly the Mongo man skeleton, which has severe arthritis in his right elbow. And it's actually a ailment that affects modern atlatl throwers as well. So some bioanthropologists and bioarchaeologists have been able to look at modern day lifelong atlatl throwers, note the distinct damage that it causes to your elbow, just the way of the throwing motion, and compare that to archaeological examples. And it seems that around 40,000 years ago, they start seeing skeletons that have this ailment in their elbow that is sometimes dubbed atlatl elbow. And the Mongo man was a skeleton that was found dated to about 40 to 45,000 BCE that has this atlatl elbow. And it's the oldest skeleton they found with the atlatl elbow.
The main takeaway for this experiment for an atlatl is that they can hold larger projectile points, for sure. Just they can support it. It's a longer thing. they can hold larger projectile points. Historically, you can just hunt larger game with an atlatl. In the Ice Age, we had megafauna. It's just bigger. By using an atlatl to hunt them, it's what it is. You can also hit your targets with greater power with an atlatl than you can with a bow and arrow. The coolest part of an atlatl is, if you look at this video, you can see that it is wobbling mid-flight, in-flight wobble. It's going whoa, 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 like making that rubber sound. What actually is happening, that's called the spline. And when that thing is flying, it's not just gonna go directly smoothly into the animal. It flies and then it goes when it hits the animal. So it's like wobble, 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 slap when it gets into it. So it makes this giant entry wound into the animal and lets it bleed out. Brilliant technology, and just such a simple technology too. It's why it was so efficient for millennia. Now let's talk about the bow. That was it.
I got that.
You guys are probably used to hearing the bow and arrow, and I say that as a reflex too, but in terms of like archaeology, it's referred to as the bow technology, so I'll probably say both, or just, I'll say whatever. The earliest date for invention for the bow and arrow that we possibly have is 71,000 years ago in South Africa. This is based on small microliths that were found left in a quiver-like formation in a cave. And microliths are just a small, I'll show you. We don't know if they were actually hafted to arrow shafts or not, but we have a pretty good understanding that yes, they were. I think so. We know it's in use by the Magdalenian period in Europe because there's depictions of it in cave art, and then we know it's definitely in use in the Upper Paleolithic and the Mesolithic because we found one. It was in a bog in Germany, Stelmar, Germany, actually, in fact. They just pulled one out of the bog. It's probably older dates now. I did this study a few years ago. There's probably more that have come out, but the gist, what I'm just take from this, they're old ass technologies, very old. I believe the atlatl is far older. Logically, it makes sense to me. The bow, you can just look at it, it's a spring device, right? And a spring, in this case, is just a piece of wood that's bendable, that has resistance, and then you attach a piece of sinew or string in between both endpoints of the wood. And then when you pull back, it creates resistance, which creates stored kinetic energy, and then you let go of the string and it releases it, and that kinetic energy is now launched with velocity and force. Alright, I got it all. We're good. Now the bow probably replaced the atlatl for many reasons, and those that I would list are, it's better equipped for taking down smaller and faster prey. A lot easier to shoot a rabbit with a bow than it would be an atlatl, though you can do it. I've seen it. It can definitely be used more efficiently in heavily forested and jungle environments. Ideally, you need a lot of room to run and launch it, and also to carry it. Also, you can just carry more arrows than you can darts. You can use a quiver on your back to transport arrows. Most people use, in the past, when you want to shoot arrows very quickly, you use a side quiver or you hold them in your hand. But the back quiver, also, people hate on it. I use the back quiver to take arrows out because why not? There's tons of advantages to using the bow, but let's say that the atlatl is the oldest. Okay, that's fine. I personally think so, with some evidence to say that. The bow and arrow, if we want to go with the South African date of 71,000 years ago, it's very old itself. Very old. So my question is, if the atlatl being used at the same time as the bow and arrow in Europe was brought to the Americas, why wasn't the bow? With any good science experiment, you need to have hypotheses, and I had 3. So the first hypothesis in this study would be, 1, there's a point at which is just too big to be fired from a bow and arrow. It's just too big. And at this point would be the transitional point. Hypothesis 2, there isn't a point that's too big to be fired from a bow, and you can fire any size point you want from a bow, and therefore they were using bows and arrows. And hypothesis 3, just to check, I wanted to also test penetration. So hypothesis 3 was, while points of any size should have penetration ability, I believe the smallest one should have the most penetration ability. So 1, 2, and 3. 1, you can't shoot big points. 2, you can shoot big points. 3, smallest points penetrate the best, which would explain why they get smaller over time. Let's say there is a point that's just too heavy to be fired from a bow. If there is, then we can call this point the transitional point. At that point, they were like, let's stop using the atlatl, let's use the bow and arrow, because our points are small enough now. Or they invented the bow, or the bow was diffused from Asia over into the Americas, and they just decided, you know what, we're gonna start shooting arrowheads now. If there is such a point like that, then hopefully I can take that point, place it on that timeline I showed you before, and find out exactly where that point size changes to where the bow and arrow was invented. Hopefully. Thus, I'd be able to find a relative date for the invention or the diffusion of the bow and arrow in the Americas based on size and function of projectile points. So, methods and materials. I hafted 30 projectile points that were increasing in size to modern arrows. And I used obsidian, because obsidian is it's an igneous rock, and it's essentially just dried lava, or dried magma. And it's pretty ubiquitous across the world. There's different cherts in the Americas and flints in the old world that, you know, are too varied to be able to be replicable. So obsidian obviously has some different qualities depending on where it's from, but it's easiest and you can find it all over the world. So I used obsidian. Also, this was pre the final season of Game of Thrones, so obsidian was like, you know, it was in at the time. So you know, yeah.
Your dragon glass.
Dragon glass.
The maesters call it obsidian.
I had a guy, John Laughlin, archaeologist in Wyoming, make these for me. He's a superb flint napper. Just look at those. Incredible. He's also a co-author on this paper. Then I mounted a 40-pound bow onto a shooting machine. It's essentially a Roman ballista. It eliminated the human error for me. I used a 40-pound bow because Ishi, the last of the Yaha indigenous Americans, he favored a 40-pound bow. I wanted to measure accuracy and precision, so I used a polar target. So I had to use R, learn coding, couldn't figure it out. So my friend Dr. Randy Haas, who was a postdoc at the time, helped me out with that. Essentially did it for me because math. I also wanted to measure penetration, so I emailed Clear Ballistics. Thank you for your support, and got a ballistics gel, a huge discount for, you know, because it's for science and archaeology, and got this block, and I got to shoot obsidian arrows into it. They were pretty thrilled about that. Sent me a bunch of stickers, a bunch of patches, and some ballistics gel.
Oh shit, dude, and it's dead accurate.
And I also got a chronograph to measure speed. A chronograph is just a simple thing that measures the light that passes over it for speed. Here's a set of points. It's important to note here that I used Thomas's equation to plug in my points to see which ones would be classified as an arrowhead or a dart according to his study. And according to his mathematics and the discriminant function analysis that I, you know, plugged in the data for, points 1 through 9 of my study were arrowheads. The rest of them are atlatl darts. That will come back to being important. Hafting. If you guys are archers or you hunt or you're familiar with arrows at all, you might be wondering, how the hell did you attach obsidian points to a arrow shaft? I should also note that I used modern carbon fiber arrows. The details are all in the study. I actually ended up using just one arrow for the whole study because then I wouldn't have to, you know, I eliminated error from the different weights of the arrows. What's neat here is I now have an ability to put this into a modern carbon fiber arrow. So I can just slide this in, twist, and it locks into place. I now have an arrow that I can pull from my back, knock onto a bow, and draw. And it has obsidian on the end. You see that? There you go. So, obsidian tipped arrow shooting off of a bow. If you're using this for educational purposes in your classroom, I'm sorry, but I gotta plug myself. You can buy the stickers and t-shirts and stuff on my store. Also, we have a podcast, a Life in Ruins podcast. We interview young archaeologists and experienced archaeologists and different researchers and scientists about, you know, how they got into the field and the research that they do. It's kind of fun, so you can check it out. Had Stefan Milo on there one time. We had Dr. Robert Kelly on there another time. Hip Hop Science Show. a multitude of guests. It's been really fun. Also, while you're at it, just hit the like button and subscribe, because that's something you have to say. I hate saying it, but okay, I'm done. Obsidian. You can see me here dremeling the sockets to make room for the obsidian points, and I didn't wear a mask. I think I was wearing safety goggles, I can't tell. Not a great idea. Pre-COVID, like 4 years before COVID, so, you know, I didn't think to put a mask on, and now I probably have black tar in my lungs. You can see the set of points here. Here I am shooting the rig. Don't ask, just move past it. On a regular 90s TV show, this would be, you know, the commercial break where we talk about ads, but I want you guys to stay with me because these two things are irrelevant to this video. Oval is a product design firm that my friend and 2 other business partners founded, and then it grew into this big company where I'm sitting today, and this is in Nashville, Tennessee. If you have a product that you'd like designed or an invention that you've always thought of, you can bring it to them, and you can hear the 3D printers behind me just going zzz, zzz, zzz. They're like, there's constantly making stuff here. I'm incredibly proud of Dave, but I do freelance video editing for them, and they let me use the studio to film, and it looks pretty awesome for a YouTube video, so. However, my real sponsor today is Passion Planner, and this video would not exist without Passion Planner. Passion Planner, it's not a diary, it's not a journal, it's like my assistant. I can't really describe it. It's just so different than any other planner. This one is the daily undated. That's the version that I use, so I'll talk about that real quick. One side is a bullet journal, which you can just write down any thoughts you have. You can doodle grocery lists, or like, you could write, today I invented electricity and got syphilis, if you were Ben Franklin. But if you were me, you could just be like, ate breakfast, worked out, did this, and you can write things down as stuff that I want to remember. On this side, though, you have your assistant. And the assistant asks you, what's today's focus? What is your game changer goal? Your personal goals, your work goals? And where this planner comes in handy for me with my mental health and ADHD is the bottom part, where the questions that it asks you. And it says self-maintenance. So I have to ask myself every day, what did I do today? Today I worked out, I walked the dog, and then I watched that YouTube video that I've been meaning to watch. The best thing that happened was my friend FaceTimed me. We hadn't talked in a long time. It was good to see her. And today I learned. I could set all this stuff up at Oval Studio and actually film a commercial. And then today in one word, I would say productive. And if you look through the book at all the different days you've written down, like I have just multitudes of stuff in here, you can see how you've actually grown, or like track your mood as you go, you know? You can also get a weekly one, and I have this one separated by months, and this one just looks like a week. So you can fill in any date you want. You don't have to do like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You can just do whichever one you want. There's no guilt. That's the best part. And another thing that this planner does very well is the monthly reflections. And the monthly reflections ask you questions like, what was the most memorable part of this month? What were the biggest lessons you learned? Who are you grateful for this month, and what are you grateful for? These are questions that if somebody asked me, like in my personal life, I'd be like, I'm not telling you that, like get out of here, I don't know. But this, when it's in the planner and it's personal, you can write it down, and it is cool to sit there and be like, whoa, I did learn how to flint knap this month, great. One big part of cognitive behavioral therapy for me is just being mindful. This planner is that for your life. So Passion Planner, thank you so much. This video wouldn't exist without this, and my life wouldn't exist the way it does without this planner. So thank you so much. And if you guys want to get a Passion Planner, you can get the daily, you can get the weekly, there's journals on there too. You can click the link in my description, or you can go to passionplanner.com and use code ANTHRO2. That is ANTHRO, the number 2. Get 15% off. Thank you so much. All right, back to the show. So what we're doing here is a penetration test. This is for point 10, and this is the first shot. It's fired, so shot A. And so you can see here, this ballistics gel down the range. We have the rig here with Adam and Master Crabe, or Alex Crabe, who has a master's degree, I should say. But yeah, we're gonna crank this on, and Alex is gonna crank it back. I'm gonna roll the tape. And what you can see is, I'm gonna hold the light up. Essentially just pulls back on the rig, and when it gets back to the point right here, Chris is looking at it. That's when we know it'll stop. So that way we have this, I think I went over this last time, but the same draw every time. What we're gonna do here is penetration test. We got the cameras both rolling. This one's in slow motion. And Adam, if you wanna Pull the trigger. There you go.
Oh,
And
that's
that
a great
is
center, too.
deadly accurate. Cool. Neat.
That is about as in the middle as it can get.
All right, the results. You can see here that the arrowhead-sized points, according to Thomas's study, shot directly in the middle. Great, you can shoot small points from a bow and arrow. We knew that. You can see there's a huge cluster of the second row of those points just lodging right next to the bullseye. Could have gone right into the bullseye had this been a human who could just adjust after the second shot, realizing they went to the right. Also, point 2 is at the top. I don't know what happened with point 2. I think it was like put on the bow wrong or something, or just it was like I hafted it and it was crooked or something. It launched way out of the way. It was part of the study. It was still data. You'll see point 26 started to shoot way out of that cluster. And then 27, and 28, and 29, and 30. Why? Most of them shot accurately. They start to behave erratically at point 26. So hypothesis 1 is technically correct. There's a point at which they just no longer function correctly. They start going erratic. We have evidence here for hypothesis 2 as well, because all of them hit the target. Remember, Thomas said that 1 through 9 were arrowheads, according to what was at the museum. Okay, well, my point 26, the one that started to behave erratically, if we want to count what's on the target erratically, nothing missed the target. Let's go with hypothesis 1 that there is a loss in function here, technically. 26 is my transition point. .26 is a lot bigger than .9. It's much more close to .30. Interesting. Also, .14 did this super sweet break. I've found this break in the field a few times when doing excavations and survey. It happens when you shoot the arrow and it hits the target and the point gets lodged in, but the rest of the arrow is still turning and it snaps. And there's a little imperfection in the stone that allows that to happen. Never seen it happen in action, so that was really cool to see. I'm gonna sum up the rest of these tests quickly. And let's jump back to accuracy. I did Spearman's row correlations, which means you gotta find the p-value, and it's statistics. That's another video. Point being that yes, accuracy and weight are statistically correlated. So there's a correlation between weight and the ability for them to hit the target correctly. That's what I'm looking for. Also, let's look at distance from centroid. So how far everything goes from the center. You can see point 2 here, wild. You can see as they get heavier, they get further and further away from 0, being the bullseye. So great. Distance from the bullseye and weight, statistically correlated. Precision, so the distance between point 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and so on. You can see here that point 6 to 7, there was a weird jump there. I don't know what happened, just some weird anomaly. Maybe that's also something to look into if I could do this study again. Again, I made it so it could be completely replicable if one of you wants to do this, if you think this is crazy or I did something wrong, like please do it. I wanna know. What's going on with point 6 to 7? Something weird happened there. Maybe that's another drop off in function where there's something I didn't see, I don't know. Then you can also tell that it goes back down and starts functioning again. I don't know what the hell that is. It happened though, it's what it is. But you can see from point 25 to 26, there is a giant jump in function, and everything else above that starts to go crazy. Point 30 goes back down towards the others. So we can say with certainty now that after point 26, we can't really predict what's gonna happen, at least with this set of 30. We need to do bigger points after that to determine more, and have another set of more of variable sizes to see what happens. Precision and weight were also statistically correlated. Also told you I tested speed, just another variable that I wanted to have just to have the data if I needed it, and because it was fun, and now I have a chronograph. I got some errors on the speed because it was an indoor archery range and it needs a lot of light to test the speed. It was a crappy one, but it got what I needed to know. Point weight and speed are completely correlated. Now for the penetration test. First off, I did this first before I did the rest of the experiment because I wanted to make sure that I got the penetration results into the ballistics gel because that was softer. The polar target was, nailed onto a horse stall mat, which, archers use to practice for targets, and that stopped them. And they would probably break, and they later did. So I thankfully did this ahead of time, thinking ahead. In case they broke into the ballistics gel as well, I wanted to get as much sample as I could. So I got 0.1, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25, and 30 for the ballistics gel test. And luckily, all of them penetrated. Check this out. You can see here in the penetration test, data that the smaller points penetrated the deepest and the biggest ones didn't penetrate deep at all. Point 30 and 25 kind of hung back. Point 20 and 15 went a little deeper. Point 10 and 5 went the deepest. I thought point 1 would be the deepest, but actually point 10 went the deepest. Point 5 went a little further than 1, and the rest of them didn't go as far, which I kind of figured would be the case. But this is interesting because point 1 doesn't have enough surface area to cut as much as 10 does. So it's small and has the surface area to make that cutting force into the point. Also, it could have been I had too much sinew on the haft or something and it cut down on there's any number of variables, but I think that's the case. And also, the carbon fiber arrow I used, there's a lot of science that goes behind how you use hunting arrows, and the arrow that I used has to have a specific weighted point on the end, and the actual point weight that I'm supposed to use on that is right about the point weight of point 10 with the haft and everything. So that is the best point size to use for that arrow length. So again, it's a replicable study. So if you want to use a longer arrow or a shorter arrow, be my guest, please do it. When I plugged in this data, the Spearman's correlations did tell me that yes, penetration and weight are statistically correlated. Now keep the straight face here. What this means is that the surface area is what helps penetrate deeper. It doesn't matter about how small it is or how big it is. It is technically, yes, size matters, but it's also how you use it. So to sum that up, point 10 penetrated the deepest, point 26 was my threshold point. For the accuracy test, everything hit the target, everything was correlated. Point 26 was the point I'm looking for. Great. For all the other tests, yes, everything is statistically correlated, but the other thing here is the penetration test. Point 10 penetrated the deepest, so the smaller ones do a little better. There's the results of the thesis. Now, if this were a scientific paper, we're moving on to the discussion. If you're an archer or you like to comment things on YouTube videos and you already have commented this, I'm gonna address it. There's that weird anomaly between point 7 and 13. I don't know what was going on with that. Could be in-flight wobble, could be the archer's paradox. And yeah, there's also that huge issue of everything kind of shooting to the right. I don't know what the deal was with that. The rig, the whole ballista that I had, I couldn't nail into the ground because I was using it at an archery range that was kind enough to let me shoot obsidian-tipped arrows into ballistics gel with a ballista in their facility.
We expand or we die. Heave!
And not let their other, paying customers come in that day. So didn't want to nail it into the ground. It was really heavy though, because it's a freaking ballista. So I don't think it was moving too much. The bow could have been slightly moving in there. The thing could have been moving a little bit, but it was heavy and I checked the cameras. I didn't see it moving. We also had duct tape on the ground showing exactly where it was. So if it shifted, we knew where to put it back. What actually I think was going on here though, is horizontal drift. According to Klopsteg, 1943, which was the first, big science study of archery physics, which took until 1943 to do, I guess. He talks about steering and planing. So I used helical fletched arrows. Helical fletching is essentially a boat propeller. They make the arrow spin very, precisely. It awards it much more accuracy, but it also gives it more drag and reduced speed. The Iroquois used this. Really cool, actually.
Unique spiral fletching makes the arrow spin. This stabilizes flight and increases accuracy.
They helical fletch their arrows. The standard arrows, though, are a little more straight, and they will give you a lot more speed, but they don't give you as much accuracy as a helical fletch does. So because I used a helical fletch, and I was getting increasingly heavier points, it's a boat propeller with a very heavy front that's now spinning this way. So it's just every time I'm shooting it, it was moving the other way. So, what can you do? I could redo it again, I guess, but that's what I got. But the broader implications of this study then, if they're true, and if someone were to replicate this and do it again and again and again and get the same results, yeah, this pushes back the preconceived notion of when the bow and arrow was in the Americas. Kind of. What I think this says is that perhaps the bow was around, like they used it, like I said, maybe as an instrument.
Now the girls are
Or, you know, used it for a bow drill. The technology was there. They just favored the Atlatl, like the Aztec and the Maya. And maybe over time their archery skill, you know, got more refined and it got better over time and led to a standardization in form, and they used the bow and arrow. But my biggest scenario in general in terms of archaeology is I believe it's warfare brought about the bow and arrow and its ubiquitous use. You get the medieval warm period where it gets really warm really quickly in about 1,000 years ago. This is also the time period in which the Crusades are happening, the Vikings are raiding, the Mongols are attacking, lots of stuff going on, and it's interesting how climate affects human behavior.
The situation is so bad that 2020 was deemed the driest year in Crimean history.
Is it not? In Eastern North America, and a lot of North America as well, when the medieval warm period happens, people had just started doing a lot of agriculture. Like maize had just gotten all over the continent. It was in, you know, Central America long before that. But they start, you know, relying on that. And your population starts growing and growing and growing, like the Neolithic in the old world. And, you know, when that happens, you have a lot of population relying on agriculture for their food. When the medieval warm period starts and it gets really hot, there's a lot of droughts. Some land that was arable before is now not, and people start to starve because you need food. So you either have to resort to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle for thousands of people, which just isn't sustainable, or you're gonna have to go attack the other area that has arable land for their land. And about this time is when you see those small points. I personally think that's when the bow and arrow came about, but I think it didn't just mean that it was invented then. I think they had it the whole time and they probably were using it occasionally. According to my study, maybe it was all the time. It's up to you. The science says so, but we haven't found direct evidence. Which leads to the next thing, which surprised me the most of this study, is that... Oh. My friend asking if he wants tacos. Now this leads to my next takeaway of the study, which is something that kind of really surprised me and I did not expect to see. And is that, you know, those large points can be fired from a bow. And that kind of means that Paleoindians could have been firing, you know, Clovis points and Hell Gap points from arrows and bows. I didn't want to accept this, but I went around just, you know, to do some science, and I measured a bunch of Clovis points that were around the University of Wyoming Archaeological Repository and at different professors' labs and in display cases, and measured them. And so the average weight of all those Clovis points I measured was 28 grams. Sounds about right. But 0.30 of my study was 33 grams. 0.30 was only 4 sizes bigger than 0.26. Let's just say it's about the same size. So yeah, it's totally plausible that they were doing this. And those bad boys were thin. So I don't know, maybe they could have been. I doubt it. I think the Clovis point's more of an Atlatl technology. The Folsom point, however, though, is smaller and could have been used on a bow for sure. But I also think it was an Atlatl technology. But the major thing I want you guys to take away from this is when you pick something up, don't say like, oh, I found an arrowhead or I found an Atlatl dart. Just say it's a projectile point. We don't f***ing know. I just spent like close to $1,000 on an experiment to tell you right now that we don't know. As a kid, I got to watch, you know, Bill Nye and Mythbusters and The Crocodile Hunter, and I just loved like science and like going in with questions and talking about it and just getting your hands on it. And also as a kid, I loved archery. My mom bought me a bow for some reason. I think when Lord of the Rings came out, I was just like hyped on it. And I would shoot them all the time in the yard, got really good with it. Got grounded a lot for doing a lot of stuff. I would light the arrows on fire, if I'm being frank. I was grounded one time, I think for unrelated purposes. But then as I was grounded, my mother came home from working a 12-hour shift as a nurse in New York, only to come home to find me not only grounded in the backyard with all of my friends who I'd invited over, lighting arrows on fire and shooting them at each other in the backyard. So yeah, I guess you could say I liked archery. When I did this experiment and I was posting about it, I had a friend from like, you know, that childhood, that time, message me on Instagram and be like, dude, it's so cool to see you like doing this now. Cause like we used to light flaming arrows in your backyard. And I was like, yeah, we did. Overall, in the end here, the science experiment was cool, right? I got to do science, I got to prove something archaeologically, and it might have some implications that are huge, or this is stupid. But the cool thing is, as a kid, I was interested in science, interested in archery, and I watched people do this on TV all the time. I then went to school for this, and now I've made it a career, and my career is due to this experiment. I'm just extremely grateful for things like this, because it's cool. And when I think life sucks, it's like, no, I accomplished that. That's pretty cool. Oh, still recording. Hey, guys, one thing. Is the mic good? Okay, yeah. So I recently quit my job to do full-time content creation. One of the best decisions I ever made in terms of mental health and like just having creativity go wild. However, I took a $71,000 pay cut, and that's not been great. If you could follow me on Patreon or whatever the words are, join the Patreon. I'll figure out more stuff to give you guys in time. Also, there's a GoFundMe on my website. And the reason I have a GoFundMe is I actually bought a school bus that has been renovated to be like a mobile studio, and I can go around the country now visiting these different sites people keep inviting me to and do podcasts with people. And you know, I travel so much, I might as well just live in a bus and travel. So really excited about that, which means I can make way more content now. But the only way I can do that is if you help me out. So join the Patreon. You can go to my website and you can buy the merchandise, or you can buy the art that I've been making. And if you hit that GoFundMe, that would really help me. But I really hate asking that. I put this at the end of the video so I could strategically delete it later. Yeah, thanks for following me, guys. This is dope. And if you're a new follower, welcome to the club. Strap in.